12 of the biggest unfinished construction projects in the world. From the tallest unoccupied building to a group of man-made islands, here's the biggest unfinished construction projects from around the world. Number 12. Hassan Tower. When people started constructing this mosque and minaret in Morocco all the way back in 1195, they were supposed to be the largest of their kind in the world. Unfortunately, the tower's founder, Sultan Yaqub al-Mansur, died in 1199 and construction came to a grinding halt. The minaret only reached about 140 feet high, just over half of its intended 260-foot height. The mosque was even less complete, with a few walls and around 200 columns being constructed. Today, Hassan Tower is part of a historical and tourist complex that is also home to the mausoleum of Muhammad V.
Number 11.
St. John the Unfinished. Though it ranks as one of the largest church buildings in the entire world, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine is still undergoing construction and restoration following a giant fire in December 2001. Hence its nickname used for the title of this segment. Begun in 1892, differing opinions about its design style led to massive, decades-long delays. Finally, the incomplete cathedral was opened end-to-end for the first time on November 30th, 1941. History tells us that Pearl Harbor would happen just a week later, causing yet another delay. Though further work has been done here and there, the massive cathedral still sits amongst the ranks of biggest unfinished construction projects.
Number 10.
The Pride and Poverty of Scotland. Modeled after the Parthenon, the National Monument of Scotland was erected on Calton Hill in Edinburgh to commemorate the Scottish soldiers and sailors who died fighting in the Napoleonic Wars. This would have been a great relic that the country could point to and rally behind, if it was ever completed. Construction began in 1826, but due to a lack of funds was left unfinished just 3 years later. These circumstances have led angry locals and observers to grace the failed monument with colorful nicknames like Edinburgh's Disgrace or the Pride and Poverty of Scotland. Several attempts to finish the project or turn it into something else have been met with unenthusiastic shrugs, and the monument is likely destined to remain unfinished for the foreseeable future.
Number 9.
The Unfinished Church. When construction on this Protestant church began in 1874, no one could have guessed that it would never be finished. The building was designed to seat 650 people and to replace St. Peter's Church. Now, 140 years later, it sits without a roof and with many crumbling pillars. Grass grows where the church floor ought to be. It all started when the church's congregation split and a group of former parishioners took off to build their own church. In 1884, a nearby cathedral burned down and funds had to be diverted for its repair. Finally, in the 1920s, a hurricane caused substantial damage to the unfinished project, cementing its fate as a modern-day ruin.
Number 8.
The Tower of David. When this skyscraper was erected in Caracas, it came on the heels of a banking boom that Venezuela experienced in the late 1980s. It was supposed to be one of the main features of a downtown that developers were hoping to turn into a banking center similar to New York's Wall Street. 1993, however, was a bad year for both the building and Venezuela. Main investor David Brillenborg died at the age of 55. At the same time, the country's banking system began to implode. By the next year, construction stopped completely. Much of the building is open to the elements, with only parts being covered by a glass facade. In 2007, around 200 families took up residence in the partially built tower and remained there for years. The squatters eventually grew to around 5,000 individuals, and the Tower of David became Venezuela's most notorious slum. Eventually, most of the squatters were relocated to areas close by. Today, the tower lies vacant with an uncertain future.
Number 7.
Palace of the Soviets. If Stalin and the Soviet Union had succeeded in building the Palace of the Soviets, it would have been the world's tallest structure. Construction began in 1937 but came to a screeching halt when the Germans invaded the country in 1941. The building, located near the Kremlin in Moscow, would have been used as a Congress hall and administrative center. A 328-foot statue of Vladimir Lenin would have stood atop the skyscraper. Materials used to start the building were repurposed for the war, and labor would never resume. In 1958, the foundation of the palace was converted to make the world's largest open-air heated swimming pool, the Moskva Pool, which existed until 1994. Today, the site is host to the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, a revival of a church that was demolished to make room for the Palace of the Soviets.
Number 6.
The new Yalu River Bridge. Built to be a connector between allies China and North Korea, and to replace the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge, the new Yalu River Bridge has instead become a sign of the tense times between the two countries. Construction has stalled, and today the bridge ends in a North Korean dirt field. China doesn't like North Korea's nuclear programs, and as a result, the bridge is only partially complete. China has turned its finished side of the structure into a military zone that is sealed off. The project, which has a $350 million budget, was supposed to open in 2014, but now only time will tell when and if the new Yalu River Bridge will ever be whole.
Number 5.
2nd Avenue Subway. The first phase of this subway line, which runs under the east side of Manhattan in New York, was finally opened on January 1st. It serves 200,000 daily riders and spans 3 stations. The full line would span 8.5 miles and would include 13 additional stations, but no one involved in the project should get too ahead of themselves. Construction of the underground subway line began all the way back in 1972, meaning it took over 4 decades just to get a portion complete. City authorities are hopeful that the entire line will open sometime around 2028. If it's ever complete, estimates state that the project would have a total cost of over $17 billion and would host a daily ridership of over 500,000 individuals.
Number 4.
World Islands. Intended to be a getaway for the rich, the World Islands in Dubai have been under development since 2003. A lack of financing forced construction to halt in 2008. Things haven't gone well for the project in the years since. The islands lay almost completely vacant and are reportedly slowly sinking into the ocean. Though developer Nakil Properties claims that they have sold around 70% of the islands, the only one that is complete is Greenland, which was turned into a showpiece by its owner, the ruler of Dubai.
Number 3.
Ryugyong Hotel. Though the exterior of the 1,080-foot Ryugyong Hotel in North Korea was completed in 2011, much of the interior lies totally empty and the building itself remains closed today. Construction began 30 years ago but was halted in 1992 due to the fall of the Soviet Union, which caused an economic crisis in the country. For years, the building stood without any windows or interior fittings. Finally, in 2008, construction resumed and the outside, as well as portions of the inside, were complete. Plans were to use the 105-story building as a mixed-use development and hotel, but instead it only represents the tallest unoccupied building in the world.
Number 2.
Sagrada Familia. Antonio Gaudi was a renowned Catalan architect who lived from 1852 to 1926. In his time, he designed some of the most unique, awe-inspiring structures you'll ever see. Most of these buildings lie in Barcelona, Spain, including what most consider his masterpiece, Sagrada Familia. This Roman Catholic church has been going through construction since it commenced in 1882. When Gaudi passed away, it was less than a quarter complete. It finally passed the halfway point in 2010. Its completion date has been pushed back several times, and spokespeople today estimate it to be finished sometime between 2026 and 2028. Despite its seemingly permanent, incomplete status, art critics marvel at Sagrada Familia for its extraordinary interpretation of Gothic architecture. And now for number 1, but first we'd like to humbly thank all of our subscribers for the comments we received on 11 World's Scariest Spiders. Hopefully we didn't scare too many of you off.
Number 1.
India Tower. Construction began on this super tall skyscraper in Mumbai, India in 2010. By November of that year, the tower was well on its way to being built, with hundreds of workers on site daily. But civic authorities had a dispute with the developers and work was put on hold the following year. Originally, it was supposed to be complete by 2016, but construction was permanently cancelled in October 2015. It looks like this beautiful building will never be gracing Mumbai's skyline. Had the project been a success, plans say that the tower would have been 126 stories and 2,356 feet tall, which would have made it the second highest building in the world behind the Burj Khalifa.